Skip the intro, you've seen the thumbnail, so let's get straight into it. I bought a PC for less than £200 with some incredible specs, especially for the price. Seems a bit too good to be true? Well, take a look for yourself. Yeah, this just doesn't look good, does it? I guess we'll attempt to fix this, if that's even possible. So what's actually wrong with the PC? Well, quite evidently the GPU has been ripped out of the PCIe slot, and by doing so the actual slot looks destroyed. There's also a massive dent on the corner, which leads me to believe that it was mishandled by the courier, which honestly doesn't surprise me, and some other points of damage, but overall, yeah, it's been properly abused. As we can see on the listing, it looked to be in rather great condition. Well, not anymore. The PC comes with an i5-10600K, 16GB of RAM and an RTX 2060 enclosed in a Corsair 4000D case with a 240mm AIO. On closer inspection, it also came with an RM850X PSU and a 1TB Samsung SSD, which were a bonus. For the price, it was a no-brainer, but I guess we're faced with the task of salvaging any parts that do work. And by the way, before I did anything with the PC, I did receive a full refund from the seller, which was great, but the PC is worth more than what I paid for. Let's hope for the best. Well, here we have the rather broken PC. I mean, take a look at that GPU. That GPU looks massacred. But we only paid about £180 for this, and for the price we paid, it is actually a pretty decent deal. You get the GPU and essentially the whole PC. As you can see, this is a Strix GPU, but before turning it on, let's take out the PCIe connectors so we don't actually, damage anything, and hopefully the PC does turn on. Alright, so of course, okay, yeah, this is not stable whatsoever, so I have to be very careful. Since the i5-10600K has integrated graphics, we can just connect the HDMI to the motherboard and we can actually get display out. So with all of that said, let's try and take out this GPU and inspect it further because it does not look good. As you can see, the GPU is basically out of the PCIe adapter because obviously it got ripped out during shipping, which of course is not a good sign. So we do need to inspect this further, but let's just take out these screws so we can actually take it out. Okay, and there we have the GPU. That is actually quite heavy, but yeah. I mean, it is a Strix, which is a nice variant of the 2060. I mean, the PCIe lanes don't look damaged whatsoever, so I am quite hopeful, but let's just leave that aside and inspect it further. So here we have the Strix RTX 2060, and the only damage I can actually see on the chassis is, of course, the little bracket, and it doesn't look too bad. I think we can just bend that back in shape. But the actual fans look in pretty decent condition, as well as the actual heatsink. I mean, now that I've had a second look at it, you can look at the PCIe connector and it is kind of bent, which is not a good sign, so let's just leave that aside. Here's a closer look at the PCIe connector, and as you can see, the clip has been broken off and the PCIe connector has essentially been ripped out of the motherboard. You can see the pins and everything, and it is kind of misaligned. So yeah, that is not a good sign whatsoever, so let's just hope for the best and see if this computer can actually turn on and go into the BIOS. So I have the PC all hooked up and ready. Let's flip the switch at the back of the PSU. Okay, so there's lights. There's a nice strip of RGB at the VRM cooler, which is quite cool, but that doesn't mean anything if this doesn't turn on, so let's go ahead. And would you take a look at that? Okay, can we go into the BIOS? And there we have it, just like that. That's crazy. Ah, that's so cool. So of course we do have the Prime Z490A, which is a very nice motherboard. This has the i5-10600K at 4.1 GHz. That's a pretty solid CPU even in 2025, and it does come with 32GB of RAM. If I'm not mistaken, the listing on eBay said this only came with 16GB of RAM, but we have 32. That's actually incredible. Okay, I guess we got really lucky there. And this of course does have an 860 EVO 1TB, which is a nice SSD to have. And also take a look at those temperatures. The CPU is at 23 degrees. That's actually pretty good. I mean, take a look at that RAM. Corsair Dominator. This basically has all Corsair parts except for the motherboard. Yeah, take a look at that. The Z490 motherboard. There's no point putting the GPU in these two slots because that's of course an X8 and an X4. So we're not going to get the most amount of performance that you can from the 2060, and the 2060 isn't that good of a GPU nowadays, but it can still handle 1080p gaming. We're gonna have to try and squeeze out as much performance as we can, but we do have to fix that PCIe slot. But it does look like everything is working. I mean, take a look at that. We are into the BIOS, which is great, but yeah, we're gonna have to fix it somehow. Just to confirm that the PCIe slot is in fact dead, what we're gonna do is put in, a pretty dusty Quadro card that doesn't really have much performance going for it, and slot it into the PCIe slot to see if it does boot up. And if it doesn't, then we can tell that that PCIe slot is in fact toast. So let's go ahead. This is all for the name of science, so if this thing doesn't boot up, then it doesn't make sense. But let's flick the switch at the back of the PSU once again and see if we can go back into the BIOS. And yes, I do have it connected to the GPU. Okay. I don't even know why I'm still clicking, but yeah, this GPU is, the GPU works. I do know that, I can confirm that, but the PCIe slot is completely toast. It is not working anymore, so we are unfortunately gonna have to buy a new motherboard for the system, which is quite sad honestly, because this motherboard is actually quite nice, but at least we know that the PCIe slot is completely broken. Alright, forget everything I just said. I put a new GPU in, and as you can see, the thing just works. Yeah, I have nothing much more to say except the PCIe connector is fully functional somehow. Hey man, I put a GTX 970 in it. I replaced the Quadro card because for some reason that just doesn't work anymore, or possibly the cable that I was using with it didn't work. But the GTX 970 that I took out from the PC that I made a few weeks ago, if you've not checked that out, then do. Yeah, other than that, it is fully functional. That is insane. Well, considering the PCIe slot is functional, I put the RTX 2060 back in. So let's take a look and see if we can boot into Windows. Okay, I can see lights on the GPU, which is a good sign. Let's turn the PC on. And can we boot into the BIOS? Come on. Yes! Oh my god, it actually works. No way. Wow. We are into the BIOS. The GPU is detecting a signal. I can't count on the reliability of that PCIe slot, so we're going to have to stress test the GPU once into Windows. But first glance, looks like everything is working, which is a great sign. Let's install Windows and do a bit of benchmarking. Hey man, what can I say except we hit it big with this one. The GPU and motherboard, two components which I thought were done for, miraculously work. That's not to say we won't encounter issues later on, so let's inspect this PC and give it a thorough clean. It needs it. There's cosmetic issues, so buying a new case is ideal, but that ain't fun, so we'll attempt to rectify them to the best of our ability. Alright, I started off by taking off the AIO fan, which for some reason only had 2 screws. This PC comes with 32GB of DDR4 3200 Corsair Dominator RAM, which were never cheap, and with the current RAM pricing that has people taking out a second mortgage, this is some good stuff to keep hold of. The AIO and fans were caked in dust, as well as the intakes. Of course I gave him a clean and then had a look at the CPU. Taking off the block reveals an i5-10600K, a decent mid-range CPU from 2020 and should hold up quite well today. The thermal paste was completely dry, so a fresh application should do the trick. The next task is to fix whatever happened to the PSU bay. Quite a large dent, which does worry me about the PSU. Oh well, the PSU wouldn't even come out without me taking out all the cables. With a bit of willpower, I managed to get it looking almost straight, and the same for the side panel, which managed to clip on back in place. Now for the most grueling task, trying to fix the front panel. During shipping, it faced some force and all the clips on its side broke off, but with some velcro tape as well as a single screw which I had to thread in to lock into place, I think we did quite well. Holds it in place and doesn't look terrible. Of course, I put the GPU back in and we should be good to go. That is when it tried to post, with no display. Thankfully, there are useful indicators on the motherboard to relay what the issue could be, in our case being a DRAM related problem. Immediately, I put the sticks back into slot A1 and B1 and somehow it sprung into life. A bit weird, but I tried this with different RAM and it also worked perfectly fine, and individually it also worked. There's clearly something very wrong with the RAM, which funnily enough is the most valuable part in this build. You know, we're in unprecedented times when you'd rather have the motherboard to break than the RAM. I put it back into slots A1 and B1 and went ahead to enable XMP and install Windows. And we're back to RAM problems as the RAM flat out refused to be overclocked, even to its rated speed. This was quite concerning, but I guess it did work without XMP. I will need to replace the sticks soon, but given the market right now, let's just forget about that. Windows installed without issues and I was able to install all of the drivers. I think we should be good for now. So the PC is all up and ready, and I have to say that we got very lucky during this video. Like, the fact that the GPU and motherboard are completely functional is crazy to me. Like, this PC has gone through absolute hell, and the fact that we're in Windows is a miracle. Now there are a few caveats to this PC. Of course, the RAM sticks. For some reason I can't enable XMP, and once I do, the RAM completely dies and I can't go through the BIOS, which is annoying, so I did have to disable the XMP, and we're currently running at 2133 MHz, which is not the best, of course. I mean, that is like the lowest speed you can get on DDR4, but I think we can deal with it for now. I mean, RAM prices at the minute are completely crazy, and of course the PCIe slot. Now the PCIe slot is completely battered and I can't really count on the reliability later down the line, so we're probably gonna have to replace a motherboard sometime in the future. Yeah, other than that, looks like everything is working with the PC. All of the drivers did install and the RTX 2060 is fully functional, so that is all great. So with all of that said, let's run a few benchmarks and see how well this PC can perform. Here we have Cinebench R23 on the PC. Let's take a look and see how well these 6 cores and 12 threads can perform. Let's run the test and see what score we get. Okay, so the score is in, and I actually think we did quite well here. So we got a score of 9141, which is actually quite decent. It's close to an i9-9800H. I mean, this CPU, you gotta remember, is from 2020, so it's about 5 years old now, and honestly, I think it did pretty well. With that out of the way, let's test out the GPU and see how stable it really is. For the GPU test, here we have Valley Benchmark running at system resolution and high settings, and we're actually doing pretty well here. So the GPU is at 56 degrees and the CPU is at 40. The components are pretty cool, makes sense because the glass panel is off, and we're currently getting around 184 FPS, which is actually quite decent. The GPU is using around 88% and the CPU is using around 12%, makes sense because this is a GPU intensive task, and I actually think we're doing pretty well here. I mean, I expected a lot worse from the RTX 2060 given it only has 6GB of VRAM, and we're actually doing pretty good. I mean, look at that, 217, 199 in the more open areas, and we're currently at an average of 201 FPS. So long we get above 200 FPS average, I think we're doing pretty well. And the score is in. We got an average FPS of 177.4 with a score of 7423 with a minimum FPS of 35.2 and a maximum FPS of 278.2. This is actually pretty respectable, and for some reason, I don't know if it's just RTX cards, but they do a lot better in Valley Benchmark than on AMD cards. For example, my 6750 XT that I have in my main rig only gets about 160 FPS average on Valley, so I'm not too sure there, but yeah, the RTX 2060 is a pretty decent GPU even in 2025. Like, you can game pretty well on it in my opinion. We can't really say that until we actually test a few games, so let's go ahead and see how well this thing can game. Starting off strong with Minecraft, no surprise here, the RTX 2060 absolutely demolished it. On fancy graphics and 12 chunks, we managed a pretty decent average in the high 300s, which is mighty impressive considering the RTX 2060 is what, 6-7 years old. VRAM will always be a limitation, especially with modern titles requiring 12GB and above, but lighter titles like Minecraft are perfectly fine. The GPU stayed at above 35% utilization and temperatures were quite decent. Let's take it up a notch with some shaders. Starting off with Astral X, quite an intensive shader, but the RTX 2060 was no slouch with a 40 FPS average. Yes, substantially lower than what we had before, but this is Astral X we're talking about. Scylla's Vibrant Light is much easier to run, and as a result the FPS average is remarkably higher. The game looks stunning and is the preferred way to play Minecraft, just so you can take advantage of the GPU, which is pegged to 100%. All in all, Minecraft did very well, but can the same be said with our next game? You knew this was coming. Fortnite should work perfectly with our current spec, and in DX12 with moderate settings we managed to achieve a solid average in the high 100s, which I honestly didn't expect. This awful Simpsons texture pack makes the game look worse than what it actually is, but thankfully there were no stutters. I even managed to get a few kills, which didn't really mean much since I'm on level 1, but I'll take it. The game ran without issues, but once we put it on performance mode on its lowest setting, we saw much of the same thing with a steady average in the 200s, which was quite solid, and to be honest the game kinda looked the same. Fortnite runs flawlessly on the RTX 2060, which honestly wasn't a surprise, but this next game might be. You know GTA 6 was supposed to be the game of the year, but that title goes to Battlefield 6. On medium settings at 1080p, well, the game ran pretty good. I wasn't able to raise the settings higher due to that 6GB VRAM limit. This game would have definitely benefited with more VRAM, but honestly, it didn't run half bad. We were able to stay above 60 FPS with no lag spikes or stutters. Honestly, I have no idea what I was doing, but as a whole, the gameplay experience was decent. The GPU and CPU worked well together with no bottlenecks, and RAM utilization never exceeded 20GB. You could probably run this game on much lower end hardware, but I feel like this is a comfortable medium. In Cyberpunk 2077, the game had me on a quite optimistic preset with ray tracing at low and high to ultra settings. I was expecting a laggy mess, but the benchmark proved otherwise. It held up quite well, and with the help of ray tracing enabled, looked really good, considering the RTX 2060 is the worst RTX card, and this is Cyberpunk we're talking about. It exceeded my expectations. No discernible stutters, and we managed to average above 60 FPS. Incredible stuff. No GTA 6, so here's the next best thing. GTA 5 Enhanced is definitely a bit more taxing on older hardware, but with our current config, I think we should be fine. On very high settings at 1080p, we managed to achieve an average above 120 with no stutters or lag. Honestly, I'm surprised at how the 2060 is still running. I mean, the PCIe slot looks like it's about to fall off. The game ran perfectly fine in more crowded areas with a sprinkle of violence. Thankfully, I don't drive like this in real life, but overall, GTA 5 Enhanced is another game that ran flawlessly. I guess the only limiting factor is my gameplay. And the final game to test, The Last of Us, is probably the most demanding game we'll be taking a look at, and of course we have it set to medium settings at 1080p. I wasn't expecting anything above 60, but surprisingly we managed to achieve an average above 60. Despite the lower settings, the game still looked pretty good. The Last of Us is notorious for using copious amounts of RAM, but we stayed at a comfortable 20GB. Thankfully there were no bottlenecks, which has been a common theme throughout every game we've tested. Overall, a very playable experience and nothing much to complain about. Of course, as you know, I essentially got a free PC as the seller did give me a full refund after informing them about the damage, and subsequently I got my money back, which was great, but some people might kick off in the comments saying I scammed the seller into getting a free PC. Firstly, that's a horrible thing to do and it's quite clear that this happened during transit. Also, there are still parts in this PC that aren't perfect. The RAM and motherboard will need replacing sometime in the future. Maybe not the RAM, as prices at the minute are egregious, but these are issues that need addressing and the refund will definitely help offsetting any loss I do face. The seller should hopefully receive compensation as there was insurance on the delivery, so hopefully that does clear a few misconceptions. Here we are at the end of the video, and if you've made it this far, I highly appreciate it. So let's give our verdict on this PC, and I have to say that we got very lucky during this whole video. I mean, I've already said this before, but the fact that the GPU and the motherboard are completely functional is crazy to me, and the fact that we could play some games to a reasonable standard was incredible. The RTX 2060 is actually quite a good GPU even in 2025. Some people underestimate the power that this GPU still has. I mean, it does have 6GB of VRAM, which is a limiting factor, but honestly, you can play some 1080p titles on it pretty decently. I mean, you saw those Fortnite benchmarks as well as Minecraft. It did pretty well. What do I have to say about this PC for the future? Of course, I do need to replace the RAM and the motherboard later down the line, and it is nice that I did get a refund so I can kind of offset the price from the new components. So thankfully I do have that. Nothing much more to say except thanks so much for watching. If you've made it this far, then I highly appreciate it. Remember to like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and also hype the video. Continue the support and I'll continue to deliver. So thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one.